Before we hit the intro music, I wanted to introduce to you guys the Yoakum Strength Insider. The Yoakum Strength Insider is our online training platform that takes all of the ideas that we talk about on this podcast and implements them into a program that is available to you at the touch of your fingers. Our goal with the Yoakum Strength Insider is to create better movers, to level up your life, and to move forward from where you are. We do this in a holistic fashion. Not only will you receive a program that has helped hundreds of people become better movers, you'll also receive access to our app that allows you to track everything, has video links for all exercises, and allows you to be in constant communication with the Yoakum Strength coach. Along with this, you'll get our 30-page PDF nutrition and lifestyle guidelines. That includes everything from what to eat, how much of it to eat, why we're eating it, meditation habits, and other lifestyle habits that we implement with our clients to really level up their lives. If you're interested in trying out one of these programs, use podcast 25 in the discount section right before you pay for 25% off your first program. Boom.
This is the Yoakum Strength Podcast. Take the leap down the rabbit hole with us as we interview elite level guests to unravel what high performance really is.
All right, we are back with season 5 officially. I make every season different in the Yoakum Strength podcast world, and typically a break between one season and the next season is just me being a lazy piece of shit and forgetting to record. And that brings us to season 5, where we are fixing being a lazy, disorganized piece of shit by bringing on the one and only Tristan Manderfeld. Tristan, welcome to the podcast, dude.
How's it going, man? I've always been an avid listener on Spotify, and I think me pestering you enough to get them back up has really, really been the kick in the ass that you needed to get it back going.
Yeah, so we had the Q&A. So Tristan is going to take over the producing roles and be with us for most of the podcast is our goal. Yep, and then help with a lot of the back end stuff, getting us rolling there. But he got himself roped into this because he was asking when will the podcast be back up on the weekly Q&A, and he got me right when I was like 3 espresso shots deep, and I sent you about a 14-page long message about coming on and producing.
Yeah, it was a straight schizo post about getting back on the podcast, about all these different things, and it sounded too good to be true, so I had to jump on board.
So we should tell the listeners. I was thinking, we were talking about having the first guest on the podcast. I was making all this list of guests, and we were talking about that. And we're going to have you produce without knowing who you are. So we got to get you as the first guest to season 5 and on here. And I want to start with, what are you doing right now? Give me a little bit of right now, because I think it's going to be funny to hear right now and then hear the fucking winding journey that it got to.
So officially kind of taking over, went down the dark side path and doing a sports science master's degree. Really jumped full steam ahead at Pitt right now, doing a 1-year sports science master's and working with a women's lacrosse, their Division 1 program. And so getting a lot of experience with things I've never had. First off, a team field sport, working with a group of 40 women who are all in that 18 to 22 range, and me approaching 30 is definitely a culture shift, and they're way different and a lot more lively. But yeah, doing a sports science master's degree here at Pitt.
And so you're getting your master's after a huge background in exercise science and coaching, and it's exactly what you planned on doing coming out of high school, right?
No, I got my undergrad 2017 in systems engineering with an environmental engineering focus, and went into the Army as an engineering officer, having zero experience with coaching, and had been an athlete my whole life, but never wanted to do a coaching role. And I, even up until about a year ago, 6 months ago, said I'm never going back to school. I'm over that. There's nothing, I don't need to go back and sit in a classroom at 30 years old. That's not what I need to do. And yeah, I got here from a very interesting road of creating my own career in the Army by being an athlete, which was something I didn't think was really possible.
Yeah, I was going to say that the background, you went the opposite route. Most people that go the strength conditioning route for your amount of time. They reach 30 and they're like, fuck this sucks, I'm leaving. I'm gonna go do a job like engineering where it's I could go do something else. And then you have you, and the only other person I know is like Chris Delphin, who went full engineering, and they're like, fuck engineering, I'm gonna go full like full strength conditioning.
Yeah, I think the big switch was I saw a lot of my friends and peers like get a nice paying job in a move to a suburb, hate their job, and get stuck in the routine of like, dang, I make a lot of money doing this thing. I went to school for it. How do I not do this? I guess I'm just going to do this for the next 35 years. And coming from having been an athlete and seeing some of the strength and conditioning, sports science, high performance directors that I have had the pleasure and displeasure of working with, I was like, man, if these people can have jobs, like I can get into this. Like this is something I can do. And even in our program so far, we've had some talks from some athletes and sports science people who did completely different tracks for their undergrad and schooling, and they've been some of like I think the best people because they didn't get trapped in that mindset for the last 10 years. They came into it with a completely different viewpoint and eye.
Well, I feel like strength conditioning too is, I don't want to say it's simple to master, but it's like if you spend all of your time studying and reading about strength conditioning, like you're such a limited coach because it's like you can learn all of it in like not can't learn all of it, but like you can learn 99% of what you need to go in strength conditioning in 1 year. And if I feel like a lot of people spend 20 years in continuing ed of just strength conditioning. So where your 5 years spent out of strength conditioning, like in the professional world, like the 5 years in the professional world that you spent studying, not strength conditioning, it's like going to take you the 1 year of this master's to catch up and everything you need to know. And now you have 5 years of like other data points that you can draw upon to bring to the field. And I feel like you see it with Chris Duffin where he like renovates so many things. And obviously having an engineering background allows him to like build things as well in his like products that he builds. But it's cool to see like somebody like that where it's like they have so many years of outside experience and they come into this like decently simple field and they're like, well, yeah, why don't we just do this? Like this is everybody has this problem. Everybody's coming up with the same stupid solution to the problem. Like, why don't we look at it like through this different realm? But most people can't because they spend so much time looking at the same things over and over again.
Yeah, that was one thing because I felt pretty unprepared and I was like, oh man, dude, everyone in my class is gonna be so much smarter. So I spent like the first 3 or 4 months before the program started of like, I'm gonna read the CSCS book. I just read the book.
That's what I just wrote down. I was gonna ask you about the CSCS again.
Dude, I read the book cover to cover. I had to take some prerequisites and was like, all right, like I'm gonna take this. And by the time I took it, I read on their website like 37% pass rate, like from people who study this field. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna fail it. Like, no way. And I take it, and it was one of the most simple tests that didn't help me become better at being a strength and conditioning coach.
But dude, now you know how far apart mirrors need to be.
Yeah, I know how far apart. Oh no, off the ground. I need to know that it should be like 68 degrees at this percent humidity.
Yep, and how many calories are in a carb? Like when like that is game changing information right there.
Yeah, and so I think that kind of aspect leads into a different point of there's so many people in this field that I've encountered and worked with haven't, and not to say there aren't people who have, because obviously there's so many good people in the field. But so many who don't touch a weight, don't touch a ball, like don't touch the field, don't like actually interact with the athletes in any meaningful way. They want to drown them out in vernacular and drown them out in terms that sound smart. And that was, I think, the biggest learning curve for me is being able to speak the speak when I like actually understood the concept and the methodology like in my head for being an athlete and like doing these things, like I understood it. And then having someone speak to me like I was an idiot. I'm like, oh, I just didn't know the term for that. But like, I know how that works. Yes. And I think a lot of people want to seem smarter than they are and better than they are by using that kind of terminology and vocab to like assert their dominance over an athlete.
Well, like you were saying too, like it's either they've never touched a field, but I think it's more so like the last time they have done anything that revolved around the field was 20 years ago. And it's like a lot of times those coaches will start off decent because they just came from it. And then like we create these fairy tales so often, like in our field, to where we get wrapped up in it. We totally forget like where actual reality was, where we were when we were an athlete and what actually mattered there. And that's where it's like, I think I talk about this. I talk about this all the time, and I get like part of it is you have to walk the walk. You have to be living and breathing this stuff, whether it's weight room stuff, whether it's speed stuff, whether it's having a cycling pursuit, having a like even softball. Like I talk about softball has taught me more about strength conditioning than anything. And I even not even if it hasn't taught me like the X's and O's, the best thing is it's keep me like, does my shit work? And I'll go find out, you know? And like so many times I'm like, fucking, I'm the smartest strength coach ever. I have everything figured out. I go and I'm like, I didn't work. So if it didn't work, why is it not working? And what do we need to focus on? But if you don't have those like punches in the face answers to, oh, what you thought worked didn't work, you are allowed to create this fairy tale over and over and over again about things that like at the end of the day, like by the time they're done telling, like they say things and you look and you're like, how is that the conclusion you came to in that like setting? Like, but it makes sense when you look at their background of like, oh, it's this like weird fairy tale they've been telling themselves over and over and over again. And now it's like so confirmed in their head that that is their new reality, but it's not actually reality that the athletes are living in.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. Like one of the things we're having like a detailed conversation on like different reps, different sets, like basically different like principles of training and how to get better. And then have you ever heard of Squattober? I've never heard of it
You've never heard of
until
Squattober?
no, like I mean I've heard of it like informally, but I didn't realize it was like an official event
Yep.
and all this. And we were all talking about like all the ideal ways to prep, the ideal ways to do this. And you see what can be ideal and there's just no intent behind it. Like when an athlete, like you could give an athlete somehow like the gift from God training plan, like the best training plan bar none. But like if they don't like it and they don't buy into it, like it's not going to work, And I now saw like some of the people, like we didn't have athletes doing it, but some of the kids like in a class, they all did Squattober and they like loved it. They got into it. Like they were coming into every session hype. And PR day was yesterday. And all these people like huge PRs in their squat and this. And I'm like, you guys know that on paper and all of you would never prescribe this method of training for any athlete, right? Like this would be the dumbest thing you could ever write. Like you would laugh someone out of the room if you're like, hey, you're going to squat 5 days a week, all these crazy intensities, all these crazy volumes, crazy percentages. And at the end, you're going to max out and it's going to be way higher. Like no one would be like, that's a good way to train. But like the intent that every one of them came in, and because it was a non-negotiable and like they were afraid to get made fun of by their friends for skipping out, or like we had 2 kids get straight bullied into doing it. They had no intention of doing Squattober, and they basically were just called babies for not getting in, and they got into it, set huge PRs. And it's like, well, we argued about what was optimal, how to do this and that, and it was like, well, you just got in, got passionate about what you were doing, got after it, and you saw huge progress. Like,
dude,
maybe
producer Tristan with the banger clip right away. That's
maybe we could see that work with an athlete, like who knows?
Dude, that is a good ass I have never used Squattober as that. Like, I'm so stealing that because that is genius. It's like the ultimate epitome of the paradox of what we talk about. Like exactly what you're saying. The same coaches that will list all of these optimal sets and rep schemes on Twitter will then go run Squattober, get perfect results, exactly what you're saying. They would never program that way. All of their stuff makes fun of that stuff. And then, like you said, the result at the end is they got the result. Like it worked.
Yeah, and it was incredible. Like, dude, I didn't do Squattober. I was like, nah, dude, I'm not doing that. Like, and it wasn't because I was like, oh, I know an optimal way. I'm just like, dude, I just don't want to squat. Like, that's not going to drive me to want to work out. Like, I'm just not doing that. But all the people who did it saw huge progress and they loved it. They like gamified it with each other. They all like were taking videos of each other. Music was getting hyped up. Everyone just got so G'd up for like each day. They got to like have something to talk about like going into the day. Like, it was like a shared struggle. And it was awesome for them versus, all right, hey, we're going to hit this set. And like on paper, this is really good, but it expired. Like you have no excitement for it. You go slow, you take way more rest between sets. You're on your phone. It's like, you just have no drive to do it. And it's a chore versus something like you're excited to do and tell people about.
Dude, this is what I've been thinking about a lot this past 6 months is becoming smarter in training has made me dumber in training because I've lost so much faith in here's the thing, Ben Patrick's program, like the ATG program, that is something in high school that I would have ran. I would have made ridiculous fucking results on it because I just went savage hard because I could believe in it because I was stupid, right? And I think that's one of the worst things. And I'm trying to find like the best way to balance this, where it's like being like it's okay to be a meathead because meatheads inspire people. I made the post on this yesterday, the YouTube post about like motivational speeches. I went through this like journey in my life where like motivational speeches, dude, used to fucking get me so hyped, so fucking hyped. Like I listened to this ET motivational speech every day before we went and lifted with Mr. Herm. Like me and Nick Check would listen to the same one, ET. You gotta like want it as much as you want to breathe, and we listen to that shit every day. And because we listened to it, we would go into those sessions and like squat until literally our blood vessels in our brains like broke, like bad. And then I got to this point where I was told like, yeah, that's just meathead, like it doesn't work. And I'm like, I started like look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is like it's all bullshit, like it's fake. And then I got to a point of like nothing hyped me up like that anymore, dude. Like I couldn't use the tool. I had a positive tool in my life, and then somebody's like, yeah, it's just meathead. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I threw away a tool that worked for me. And I was like, and then I kind of like went through that process to like try and outsmart this. And I was like, it's the same thing of like how when you put all your faith in hard work, because like I think that is kind of like the nihilistic message there is like you can work as hard as you really want, you can work as hard as you want to breathe, you can do all those things, and then bad things in life still happen. There's a lot of luck, whether it's sport or life. There's luck. There's things that still happen regardless of how hard you work. So then you got to go like explain it in the science route. And the science route is not like it's not about hard work. It's like working smarter, not harder. But then we don't have the answers. We don't have all the answers in the science route, but we make it a religion. Like we make the science, the sports science, the religion without the answers. And we're like putting our belief in these things, swearing out these things because there's nothing that backs it up. It's like there's also nothing that backs a lot of this stuff up either. Like we're just believing in it there. And I like made the point of trying to find the balance between those two. You don't need to throw out your motivational speeches if they work. Like if they're working for you, why get rid of that tool? If it's not working for you, and this is like this would be the scientific argument, like the sports science nerd argument, where it's like the kid that watches the motivational video and then doesn't actually go work out, but he like convinces himself he did something, you know, like that, like the fake hype train that the people talk about where they're posting the selfies in the gym, but they're not actually lifting. And it's like, you got to find the balance between those two, use the motivation, but then you still have to do the big rocks, the big science pieces, and actually put in the hard work.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I mean, we look at studies, and that's one thing that we're taking a stats class right now, and I'm like, man, I actually realized you can make the numbers kind of say what you want them to say to a point pretty easily. Like, not that all studies are garbage or all studies are like bullshit, but like a 20 person 8 week study isn't going to tell you what you need to know for an individual. Like we understand that everyone's different, and like these studies can serve as a guiding principle, but they're not going to define an individual on like how to guide that individual. Like there's a lot of things that we should probably do and get the big things in place. Like no one's going to argue like squatting is like doing some like getting in the weight room is going to be bad for performance, but should that be the only thing that we do for performance? Probably not.
Have you read the book Science Fictions?
No, I have not read that one.
No, okay. People that are watching the video, this is the book right here, Science Fictions by Stuart Ritchie. That book is gonna fuck your mind up, Tristan. Absolutely fuck your mind up, because it's like he talks about how there's like 4 ways to fuck it up as a scientist. It's the doing it on purpose because you like want to raise, so like you fib the numbers. There's like the bias of like not knowing how you fucked it up, like more of an ignorance thing. And then there's the like you think you're doing everything right, but like you said, like there's 2 ways to look at the numbers, and you're always going to have the bias to look at the number of that like shows a significant result, right? So even if you have a good approach and a good intent going in, you naturally lean towards you want your hypothesis to be right. Like we're emotional beings, so we like want it to prove something, and if it doesn't, you try to like lean all of your data and testing towards it. But that book, dude, that book fucked me up with like all of the studies. I'm like, nothing is real. Like none of these science, like none of this is real. It's so messed up.
No, and we take it for granted. Like we understand individuals have favorite colors, favorite foods. Like people could sleep differently, they dress differently, they have all these different things. But then in training, everyone's the same. Like that makes that makes no sense. And one good example, we were doing some sprints, and one of the girls on the team, she like sprints really erratically. Like if I watched her in isolation, I'd be like, man, someone needs to like fix that. Like she sprints real weird. And then we like, did testing. I'm like, well, she's the fastest player. So yeah, there's nothing to fix. Like what she clearly gets something, and the next fastest player has like the like super close, but like the picture perfect running form. Like it looks like just a gazelle, and you put them next to each other, and you're like, wow, they're like almost exactly the same speed and looks completely different. So like if I told the girl who could run perfectly to run like that, she would run so much slower. And if I tried to like get in her head and be like, hey, there's an optimal way to do this, you need to change everything you're doing, like she'd be just worse. And so it's like I could easily make someone worse.
Dude. And that was one of the biggest eye openers at St. Thomas when it was like the first large group of elite level athletes when we were at the Division 1 level. Is you would have the erratic form be the fastest, and then you would have the perfect form be the slowest. Like that was the wildest like eye opener. I'm like, that dude runs so much prettier than the other person, and they are so much slower. And it's like that is your paradox. They're like, that should be your eye-opening moment. And most coaches, like you said, like they don't look at that like, oh fuck, we should like look into that. It's like just fix. It's like the one athlete that runs super slow, and it was typically like 5 or 6 athletes every year we got. They had always had like they'd been in speed school since they've been 5 years old, right? Like it's just like usually a wealthier family, somebody that's put them in there. And in some regard, it's work because they got into college athletics, which is a good step. But they're so neurotic about it because they've been told so many things. So it's like that athlete can run more erratic. Like that's the balance too, is like try to get them to free up. And maybe you do mess around with some of the erraticness of the one athlete to like push them in some direction and trying to find that balance. But I think it's always one direction. It's always cleaner. It's always more uniform. It's like I've seen that hurt so many athletes. Like not only like not make them better, but it makes them like worse. It freezes them up so much where everything is so tight.
Yeah, and I think that is something that I've experienced a lot myself in like the endurance realm. It's one of like the big things. I mean, you've probably heard it now too. Is zone 2 training. Like obviously in an endurance sport, like that's pretty huge, right? And like your aerobic base actually is pertinent to the sport itself, so you can't ignore it as much as you probably could ignore it in other sports. And the training has basically been like more hours, and basically just put yourself into like there's never enough hours type camp. And I had tried that, like, okay, this is what I need to do. And it's for a while, it like was working, and then it just ruined me. Like I got just so beat up, so tired. I was irritable. I was cranky. Like nothing about it made me like better. Like I started to just get worse, but I was like, oh, this is what needs to be done. Instead of, I mean, in hindsight now, stepping back, I can be like, okay, like I now have a data point that I can step back from and know that that's too much for myself, and realize that like, hey, I don't need my training to on paper look like what someone else's training on paper looks like to be successful. Like, I think that was one of the big eye-opening things as an athlete myself of like this, I don't need to do it this way. If like most of the big rocks are in place and most of the like big important training and like sleeping and eating and all those other things are there, I don't need my thing to look like exactly cookie cutter of someone else just because it worked for them.
Did you find yourself fighting that in the moment? Because like I feel like that is when it was like really damaging for me as an athlete. Is Olympic lifting was a great example of this. I had a triphasic example too, where it's like deloads were also a huge one for me. It was like every time I deloaded, I performed so much worse. I felt so shitty like that. It just didn't work for me. It was never a thing that worked for me ever. But I always told myself, like I was always told I needed it, and I always did it. And for like so many times, dude, I had so many data points. It was like, dude, it doesn't work for you. You're a dumbass. You should look at this. And I fought it so long because the science, the sports scientists were telling me something different.
Yeah, absolutely. Like fought it tooth and nail, like literally to the point of listening to some people of like, oh, we just got to like train through this. We got to just train through this. And I'm pretty against the idea of, tapering and being primed for every event, but at some point, like you actually
have some prime.
Yeah. You have to, at some point, like I'm racing to race, like I'm racing to get a result. And like, I was just training through events, like, oh, I know it was like, I'm going to get there. Like in 2 months, like this will benefit. And it was like, no, I'm just like not racing as well as I could. I'm being more mad, but like I'm like, this is how it has to be done. And it was like a big step back from that, and just basically like not sharing my trading publicly. Cause I'm like, wow, I am doing a lot. I'm doing a lot less in my head than other people are doing, but like I feel better. I'm able to do decent at what I want to do well at. And I feel like this is manageable and how it works for me. But like I hear other people talk about it, I'm like, dude, holy cow, like that's like 2x what I'm doing per week. Like how does that, and but it works for them. Like,
Yep.
they're getting similar results. And I think like that was a big step forward of, you need to be able, you do need to like push yourself to kind of like see where those data points are and fail, which is I think one thing some people get kind of scared of, with like all the wearables, all the tech, all the reading. It's like, oh, I don't want to overtrain. Like I need this, I need that, like without ever having gone to a point of being like, okay, wow, that was bad. Like that, that was quite bad. And I need to step back, because you might be one of those dudes or chicks that like it works for, like going that deep.
I think one of the things here we should do is draw back to your athletic background, so you don't, because this is the thing that I've been catching on to, is like you have kind of like some of the stuff I talk about, right? It is exactly what you were saying, right? Like look at the data points and everything, but then you have these like kind of like usually it's like senior high school or like punk freshman athletes that literally just like haven't done enough, and it's like their excuse for not succeeding is that like it is the program. It's like it's all stupid, it's all dumb, and it's like it may sound like punks, like little punks. Like you just need to go fucking train. You should give let's talk about your athletic background so people know like now this is an elite level fucking athlete that has gone through like all of this stuff and is willing to put it. It's not like you're not willing to put in work. It's not like you're some freshman college athlete that just is swearing off these programs and saying all strength conditioning is stupid because, or this program is stupid because I'm not succeeding. It's like you're not succeeding because you suck and you just need to work longer. Like talk about your background in athletics there.
Yeah, so I basically started wrestling at like kindergarten and wrestled my entire life. Me and Austin went to the same high school, and I mean, you
Yeah, they're
probably heard
decently
it.
big high school for wrestling, right? They enjoy wrestling in Foley.
Yeah, they love it. Like it's a town of what, 2,000 people, and it's like I don't know about now, but at least when I was there, it was like standing room only for wrestling matches.
I was
Like,
put in a singlet when I was 5 years old in this town. They're like dead ass serious. We had like what NSWA state or what was that? We had that like we had state
there were
wrestling
state
like,
tournaments at like second and third grade. Like I remember having gone to state and like regional tournaments in like second, third grade
second grade.
through
I
high
remember
school.
these tournaments. There was like like I was looking at like through some of the medals as a kid. I was like, this is a state tournament. Like what? I was 6. Like how did that work?
Yeah, and so I actually open enrolled. I like chose that school opposed to like the high school I was supposed to go to, and went there basically for wrestling and maybe academics or something. But went there for wrestling.
Maybe
Um,
academics and
when like I was a tiny kid growing up, and I didn't hit 100 pounds until sophomore year. So I wasn't able. I remember freshman year I was wrestling varsity at 103 pounds at the minimum, which was 88 pounds. Uh, so I was pretty small, but like went to state 3 times. Like third, fourth. We won a whole bunch of tournaments as like a team. Did a ton of like international style wrestling. So like I got like second at world team trials for like U17, like second at like the biggest international or biggest national tournament for like Greco-Roman at Fargo. I got second there. And so like I had been a pretty good wrestler and got recruited to wrestle at West Point, and that's where I ultimately went. And wrestling had been my life. Like I maybe took 3 or 4 weeks off a year, like in the summer when there was like literally no tournaments going on. Like maybe August was like the only month of the year I didn't wrestle, and it might have only been 2.5 or 3 weeks. And so I went to West Point, and wrestling had kind of been my life. And so senior year I had some injuries, and when I got to West Point, I had like a pretty catastrophic injury. Like I messed up my neck pretty bad, and
was
basically
this in
got
practice in a meet. What happened?
yeah, just in practice, like 2 months in. Um, like lost feeling in my arms, like wrestling, got told by the AT, was like, oh, it's just a pinched nerve. Like you can be back in 2 weeks. Like you'll in like a week, you'll be good. So I'm like, oh, hell yeah, this is sweet. And like it happened again. went to like another hospital.
What happened in the movement? Like, what was were you wrestling? You knew right away, or was it just
it was right away. Like it was mid practice. Like I had to stop. Like just lost all sensation in my arms, which was like as like an 18-year-old kid, it was like not very cool.
Yeah.
And went to a hospital. Basically, got told that hey, like if you want to graduate from West Point, like medically and physically, like you got to stop wrestling. And I had talked with some mentors and counselors.
Did they say what it was?
Something with I think it's like stenosis or something. Like I had like a naturally narrower spinal column, and like those jarring movements in that area like would smash my spinal cord against my spinal column. And so I had to have like an identity crisis freshman year, like 2 months into moving out of a small town and living in New York. Of well, if I can't wrestle, I'm not gonna like leave this school and try to wrestle somewhere else. Like that's a dumb like that's dumb. Like I'm already here. I'm already at like one of the best schools in the country, and I can stay here. And so I stopped wrestling, and knowing that I needed to do something, I started cycling at 19 to 20 years old.
How did you pick that up? What happened there?
Well, at school, you either have to be like an NCAA athlete, so like a D1 athlete. You have to be like on one of the competitive clubs, or you have to do intramurals and march in parades. And my head was like, I'm not marching in parades. So I got to find anything. Like I need to find anything else. And my dad had always biked kind of growing up. And so I literally saw a poster. I was like, try out for the cycling team. Like we go and race this many weekends a semester. And I was like, all right, sick. I'm showing up to the trial.
Was this the only other thing you tried up to this point to like do?
I gave a dabble at track and field because like I thought I could do it, and I had trained up and like actually was quite fast at running, like for me, and it was like okay, I can maybe like make their like practice team. And the coach said we over recruited, we're not taking any walk-ons, which was pretty devastating. So I in a heartbeat switched over and tried out cycling, which was like an amazing decision. So started out at literally collegiate D level cycling after I made the team. Like there's D, C, B, and A. Was like super eager. Got up to A.
Sorry, what was that? What was the trial like that day one? Like, did you get in and were you like, I can do this? Or was it like,
yeah, I could do it because I think one of the things that stops a lot of people is they've like never ridden a bike. And like at least I had like ridden a race bike at one point in my life. Like I'd ridden my dad's bike. So like I understood it. Like I had watched cycling before. And I also had just come from being on like a D1 team. So I was like in shape. It wasn't, I wasn't the normal person trying out for a team because they didn't want to march who hadn't done a sport.
There was a lot of those at the trial. Was it bad?
Yeah, there was a lot of people who would like, they had no business. It was like the equivalent of kids showing up running a 10-minute mile trying to make the cross country team. Like praying, they're just showing up on a hope and a prayer. Like maybe no one tries out and I make the team. Made that. Got to the A level by senior year. And I kind of thought like that was where cycling would kind of end. It's like I'm graduating from college. I got a real job now. I'm going to be like an engineering officer in the Army. I'm going to do all this. I still had more time than I thought. So I kept biking. I kept racing, got like a real coach. And as everything would have it, I moved to Colorado to work at Fort Carson. And that's where this organization called the Army World Class Athlete Program is stationed. And kind of being a stubborn and persistent person, I rocked into their office. I walked in, that probably not supposed to do it. I just like walked into an office that usually no one walks into, and it's like, hey, I want to try out for this. The guy almost like gave a chuckle, like, all right, dude, all right, sounds good. Gave me a laundry list of paperwork to go through. At this point, I'd made some friends like on the national team and was getting pretty decent at riding and like getting to a level that I felt confident at. And I basically convinced the national team coach to vouch for me. I gave him a huge speech of, hey man, this is an only positive for you. If it doesn't work out, you didn't pay anything, nothing happened. But like, if it works out, you get a rider that is like here, is paid, has health insurance, is like ready to go to any races at any time. And I did some performance testing for him and he agreed to get me on. And so I got in as I think the one and only cyclist ever into this program, and basically created my own job.
Who else is in this program? Like when you say the only cyclist, like what else is in this program?
So they're known for their distance running and their wrestling and boxing and rugby now. So like their wrestling program has produced so many Olympians, national team members, world team members. Like I think 2020, 3 of the 6 weights were from us. Like our program, like so 3 of the 6 weights for men, like were from our room.
That's
of
crazy.
20 guys.
Are they all from West Point at that point?
No, they're all from all over in the Army.
Okay,
Like they're just everyone in the Army, just like random people. So it's like a small group of like 60 athletes and like 6 admin people. And it's just like this in this super small, unbranded, like or minimally branded building, where it just like has some of the absolute biggest dogs of any people I've ever met. Like just people with crazy stories and so good at their sport and like so knowledgeable, and they're just like in this small building that people don't even know exists. But yeah, I don't know. From there, I got to go race like around the world. So I got to do some like World Cups. I got to like make the national team. I got to win some national championships and go kind of race around the world. And it was an awesome experience. And so like from all that, I have completely transitioned how I was an athlete from a wrestler into what I guess I'll consider a top tier cyclist, who was going to World Cups and winning races.
What was the process of going from I'm just gonna go cycle to so I don't have to march in a band to like I'm gonna go cycle to make a World Cup team? Like when did you make that decision? How did that go? Is that just like the athlete you're like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna fucking do it?
I think initially it was no desire for that. Like I mean, it was just those small increments as I went on. It was like, all right, I'm a D cyclist. Like I need to like not be a D cyclist. Like, I don't want,
He's like I
there,
gotta get to see.
well, it's like there's people on the team who are A's, and so it's like, okay, well, I want to compete against them. And so it was like basically just seeing those around you, and you're never gonna be, or you shouldn't ever be the biggest fish in your pond. Like as soon as you get there, like you can look very immediately outside of your circle and realize that there's people a lot better than you for almost everybody. And so I think it was that of like, oh, I made A's, like I'm one of the better people on our like collegiate teams, which isn't that good. And then we'd go to like a national championship and you still get your teeth kicked in. You're like, whoa, like these people are good. And then you're like, okay, well, I want to be them. And so you just kind of keep seeing that like next level. And there's not really a stop, because it's cycling and it's any sport. Like you can just as easily lose your next race and then you're not the top person anymore.
Not the top person anymore.
And no one wins every race, like not even close. It's one of the few sports. Like it was a big adjustment change, like from wrestling, where if you're good, like you're going to win most of the time. Like you're going to win vastly more than you lose. And cycling is the opposite. Like even if you're good, like you're going to win like 5 to 10%.
It's like a baseball batting average.
Yeah. No, it's like 5 to 10%. Like not even like 30%. Like you're not winning like that much. Like if you get a few wins throughout the season, you're like, nice. That was good.
Yeah. When did you, because you weren't a big weight room guy, correct? When did you like go, okay, this stuff matters, and then make the switch to like this stuff is going to matter for other people, so I want to go do it?
I think I had just never taken that approach because I'd always just been like leaner and smaller, and I had never needed it. It seemed like it was one of those things that like I got by without it. And it definitely would have been beneficial. Like there's people who were way stronger than me, and I'd get beat or something. But I realized that it's just something I wasn't doing, and probably subconsciously is like, well, why not do it? Like everybody, at least in some form, touches the weight room.
Was it like an eye-opening moment, though, where you like cycling, you're like, oh fuck, these guys are cooking me, or something like that? Like I'm missing this.
It was that I felt like I was slightly smaller than what I wanted to be for like the events I wanted to do. And I'm like, well, you can't just like, I don't want to just get fat. Like that's not going to help me. And so I think that's how our relationship actually started. I had that kind of realization, and I had exhausted my knowledge at the time of lifting weights of like, all right, I had squatted, I had deadlifted, I did some pull-ups and some push-ups. And now what do I do? Like I've done this for 5 months and I don't want to just do this anymore. And so reached out to you and eventually, kind of embarked on that journey that way.
Yeah, that was pretty dope. And then how did you go, I want to be in the strength like conditioning world from cycling?
So I don't think I necessarily even want to be just in the strength and conditioning world, but I actually do want to be as bad as the words are to say, like in the sports science world. Because I think I think there could be a lot of value given by sports scientists who have been in the field, have like experienced it and like kind of understand that people are humans and they're not like a machine that can operate at 100% efficiency. Like there's going to be reasons that you fail at a race that don't make any sense and your training was perfect leading up to it and you failed at the race. And there's going to be this other situations that you see of like everything went poorly in the lead up to this and they somehow did well. And I think being able to give people like data and like kind of guide them in the right path is going to be helpful, especially like giving them a better mindset on like what you're doing and breaking it down to them. Because like I had, like I said, I understood some methods and principles like in my head. Like I was like, oh, I need to do this to do this. But like I didn't actually understand like the mechanisms behind it or why. And I think being able to like explain the why to people for certain athletes will help.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you'll be able to bring to the field too is your sport is like you've told me some of the data pieces and showed me some of the data that cycling takes. There's not a team sport out there that takes the data that cycling takes. It is wild.
No, I think that's the biggest thing that's helped me so much in this program is everything in cycling is so much more data driven because it can be like you're on a machine. And it's like, I'm not going to say it's similar to F1, where they have like the analytics of the actual machine.
The analytics you've sent me though, that's exactly what I thought when I got it. I was like, this is like those Netflix documentaries.
But in a way it is like, you have your heart rate, you have like your effort levels, like you have your wattages you're pushing, like you have your aerodynamics, like you have like your positions, you have like the materials you're wearing, and you're just so tuned into that. And I think that stuff's so interesting that you can take that into maybe like a team sport environment. We had like a good presentation from someone actually, and it was like, good sports science is good sports science. Like it doesn't matter the sport. Like if you can like identify what the demands are, like how you can measure them and like how you can actually affect change with the athlete in a meaningful way, like that's going to be beneficial regardless of the sport. And so like I think taking some of that like cycling knowledge and being able to present it in like a team sport environment is going to be super helpful, but also like taking some of this team sport environment that I'm like now being exposed to, and I'm like, wow, there's so much here that could be applied to cycling that like we're just ignoring.
Yeah.
That I'm like, this is nuts. Like, why have I never thought of small-sided games for cycling? Like this makes so much more sense, like compared to training on your own all the time.
So that was going to be my next question, because tying in your two sports, like those two sports could probably not be more opposite. Like wrestling is probably some of the dumbest sports science I've ever seen, especially probably high level wrestling, like Olympic level is way different, but like that probably can't. Okay, good. Nah. Yeah. But like high school, you see some of the stuff like goes on in high school wrestling. You're like, what the fuck is happening? How would you take like your approach now with more of the sports science stuff and help a field like that? Like where it's like, dude, you are in the Stone Ages.
I think it's tough because we actually have like one of the people in our class like working with wrestling, and they're even having a tough time to working with them. And like the people who are actual full-time staff, it's tough to work with like a sport like that because they're so ingrained with their tradition. And like
tradition is wild of wrestling.
This needs to be done this way. This needs to be done this way. And I think if you can get more people who have like done that, like if you can give the quick accolade of like, dude, I wrestled like at this level, I get it, like, and I used to do it like this. But if you can give a better information, like, hey, we don't need to run hill sprints like at a weird tempo when it's cold out at 5 a.m. to like build resiliency. There's probably a better way to do this, but I know this is how you've done it. But if you can like give them the actual answer and a why, and also maybe show them someone else or like some other system that's doing it like in a different sport, like, hey, this other sport where they have so much data and these guys are dogs, they train like this and it's very similar to you guys, like let's try it this way. And kind of like get them to like buy into it themselves. Like, I mean, it's like a kid. No kid wants to listen to their parents, but the second the coach says something, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's what coach said. Like, I need to do it that way." Even though your dad has been telling you the exact same thing
Yeah.
for the past 8 months in your backyard. Like,
It's like trying to train your girlfriend, bro. Like they'll never listen to you. They'll go to like any trainer other than you.
yep, exactly. And so I think just kind of taking that and almost like hiding the sports science in the training, I think is going to be the method. Like some of the ways are convoluted and kind of cool, but like if you can geek out about it and then like almost build up the whole report and then like show them after, like, hey, this is like what happened and here it is. They can buy into it. For example, like one of our football guys, we were talking about like our research project that we need to do, and they do these. Have you ever heard of like, what force plates are, right?
Yep.
Like the jumping things. Well, every time you jump and it saves, like it also takes your weight, which is something that like a lot of athletes don't know. Like it measures your weight, because that's how like it calculates everything. And one thing that coaches have always brought up to football people, which isn't my realm of expertise, is like losing mass throughout the football season. Like people will like lose weight and like get weaker. And one way to like measure strength and explosivity is like your jump height. And some people, if you're losing weight throughout the whole season and you're jumping the same at the end of the season, like on paper, you're like, oh, they're jumping the same here and here, same strength. Our program was dialed. But like if you could show them the graph of like, hey man, they started at 200 pounds, they finished this season at 184, and they're jumping the exact same height, which literally means they're getting weaker.
Yep.
And they're like, wait, what do you mean? And you can be like, well, a lighter object moved the same height. So it's not as explosive. And they're like, oh, okay. And so like you can kind of put that information like into their hands and maybe they do something with it. Like at the end of the day, it's not my job or like another sports scientist's job to like redefine all the training protocols. It's like give them that data, and like they might not even realize that they're like committing like a bad training plan because they're like, okay, yeah, they jumped 30 inches here and they jumped 30 inches here. They're staying working, strong. Bro. Yeah, they're staying strong. You're like, well, actually, they're putting out this many newtons less force when they're jumping. Like, and it's significant. Like they're losing they're losing 7% of their body weight and they're still only jumping that same height, which means they're not as strong. And they're like, oh shoot, that's a good thing. Like, we should change that. And like, I think that's going to be for those kind of sports. It's like similar for wrestling, like with like a big weight cut sport. Like if you can give a coach those kind of metrics, they could actually maybe change something. And it's like almost like sneakily doing a research study without them knowing.
So one of the words that you used there was resilience, and you are a part of or have been a part of two sports that are probably two of the most like resilient type sports, right? Like you have to have a dog in you. At some point, you have to push through barriers, especially in wrestling. Like there's gonna be tough shit and fucking hard things where you're gonna have to go against all of the sports science to perform and compete, right? How do you go about like, and this is something I think about a lot. So I just like to hear like your brain. There's no exact answer here, obviously, but like, how do you go about building that resiliency, building a mental toughness is a stupid ass word, but like at some point there is that point where it's like you're gonna have to go against what's smart to go against like to go get what you need to go get type thing. And it's almost like the whole thing is like you have to do hard things to get like in that mindset in some regard, like do hard things. So it's like the question is like, how do you do hard things smarter? Like how do you do hard things in a better way to actually get to that point in which you can push through in those moments?
I think that's one of the big things is like every athlete's going to be different. Like there's some athletes who are going to like, they could be having a heart attack and, they would run another sprint, they won't stop. And then there's some athletes who would like, cut their nail wrong on the day and be like, oh dude, my hand's fucked. Like
I'm
I
out.
can't,
Can't
I
bench today.
can't do this. And I think it's finding the balance with those. And so like with an individual, I think it's getting honesty. And that's one thing that I'm guilty of, and for sure almost all athletes are guilty of, is lying to the coach and the sports scientist or the nutritionist or whoever these staff are. And then that's when the blame, and you can't blame the coach or the athlete, or like can't blame the coach or the staff or any of these people when they've been having super hard practices. And like one of the things the lacrosse team fills out every morning before practice that we look at is like an actual de-identified wellness report. And like it's de-identified so that, you can hopefully be more honest. Like if you're like, hey, I am feeling ruined, it's not your name attached to it, because you don't want coaches to see like, hey, I'm tired, my knee hurts, this hurts, like I feel bad. Because no matter what kind of coach you are, like you're going to form some type of bias in there about that. And so I think that's one method is getting athletes to be honest, because I'm guilty of that. Like a coach would be like, hey, how is this like last block of training been? And you're like, you're ruined. You're on your hands and knees trying to just crawl out of this hole. And you're like, oh, not too bad. And then, it's their responsibility to be like, okay, well, that wasn't too bad. Like, I guess we can like twist the throttle a little more. And so I think getting to a point with athletes of trying to get them to be more honest, whatever that is, of getting them to truly trust you, if it's a team sport, those like de-identified things, I think help a lot, because you can actually be honest. And if the coaches actually make changes to things based on those reports, because it's one thing if they're for 3 weeks filling them out and they've said, I'm ruined, I'm ruined, I'm ruined, and the team's rating themselves at like a 2 out of 10 for 3 weeks and they don't change anything, and like, okay, well, I'm not gonna fill these out.
Yeah,
anymore.
this doesn't fucking matter anymore.
But if you're seeing a big trend, like finals are coming up or whatever, midterms just happened, and I know myself, I crammed, stayed up late, didn't eat properly, and they come and do a practice that's supposed to be super hard with like crazy conditioning, and the team reports a 2 out of 10. Like generally average 40 women. Like I don't think 40 women are all going to lie to you at once, and you should probably change something then. Like, hey, we should probably tone it down. And you don't have to tell them you tone it down, but you just like make it more manageable for them. And also you let them know you're reading it and you show interest in that. So I think the only answer there is going to be building a true relationship with them and being honest with them of like, hey, I know you guys are ruined. This is going to be a day we have to push through. Like, I get it. Like, I get it. You're not like, this is purposeful here. Like, we don't have any games until February. It's okay to feel like shit in October. And
dude, it's crazy how far that simple conversation goes with those athletes. Cause it's like just because it's honesty from the athletes, but it's also honesty from the coaches. Like I think that's a big piece of it. As long as an athlete has a direction in this, it's like, it's okay to feel like, because I think that's part of like sports, like in disservice sports scientists have done. They have not communicated the message that not feeling like a 10 out of 10 every day, that's okay sometimes, right? Like again, the point where you're like, at some point you have to win races, yes, but there's also points where you're like, you need to not feel like shit because we need to adapt and we need to like level up here.
Yeah, and that's completely it. Like, I mean, I've heard you rant about like the Whoop scores and stuff, and like I'm currently wearing a Whoop. Do I like look at my day-to-day like score? No, because if you just do some research, you can like see what goes into that. And I could realize that like if for 30 days or 45 days, whatever it is, just slept like crap, did all the wrong things, it's going to now calibrate to that. And now my Whoop score is going to be 100, even though I'm doing everything wrong. And so it's like, well, if I'm doing everything right, like if I'm getting the 8.5, 9 hours of sleep, eating properly, doing this, like if I get 7.5 hours of sleep, it's going to be way outside my average. And it's going to say, oh, you're at 40% today. It's like, well, no, I'm not at 40%. Like, it's just, I'm a little bit outside my average. Whereas someone else, that might put them at 100 if they slept.
Yeah, 120% for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so it's like understanding the metrics and getting them to actually understand what we're measuring and the reason behind it is important. And so that's, I think, the big thing is understanding. And a lot of athletes, and myself included, didn't get told like the metric we were measuring and why we're measuring it. And I was like, oh man, I feel like crap. I don't know if I can get through today. Like everyone else must feel good if they're getting through it. Like I'm too afraid to like to speak up and say how I feel because everyone else is doing it, especially in a team environment. Whereas most likely everyone else feels probably pretty similar to you, unless you're a big piece of shit. You're going to be pretty in tune. If everyone's doing the same thing, you're going to be pretty in tune with them. And so giving them that why of, hey, we're feeling like crap because of this. And don't worry, we will feel better by this time.
Yeah, and it allows you to adjust the program on the fly. It allows you to actually, if you're honest with the data, it allows you to actually use the data, right? Like, and that's a two-end spectrum to where you get more real data from your athletes because you were honest about it, and then more real adaptations and things that you can change on your end. But again, you'd have to like actually be able to like be willing to change it and not like, because I think a lot of the approach is regardless of what the science says, I still know better. So it's like I'm not switching anything. And it's like just you don't have to switch all of your principles. You don't have to change everything that you do. But like if it's blatant and like why not just be a little bit adaptable? I mean, it's the same, like it's the Bruce Lee thing. Like just take what is useful here. You don't have to take if it's not helping you again, if it's not there's no rules to this. If it's making you race faster and you're winning races, you're hitting the ball, you're making your shots. There's no rules. Like take what's useful to allow you to get to that point.
Yeah, and that's really it. Is I think trying to like measure what's important, get accurate, like valid data, and then give that back to the athletes or the coaching staff, whatever it is, so that they can make better decisions. Because like that's really all at the root of it. Sports science should be awesome, but I've seen it work very badly of like, well, this is what needs to be done. And so like every athlete tries to just jam themselves into this mold that will work for 10% of people. And so then people are like, oh, well, it must work. And you're like, well, what if this person just did something slightly different? Would that have also worked for them? Probably, but they were like too afraid to try it or to adjust something because they're like, well, this is what this study in this textbook says.
Yep. And dude, one of the worst things that ever happened to me was sophomore year. We brought on a sleep expert, and she explained every single benefit and like positive and the reason you need to sleep. And it changed my sleeping for the positive because I'm like, oh fuck, this is super important. But it was one of the worst things because anytime I didn't have the perfect sleep from that moment forward, I'm like, I'm fucked. I'm gonna get injured. Like this thing's gonna happen to me because of like the information. I just think it's like the perfect example of you're just not. I just think that's an example of just not being honest about the data, like overemphasizing the data in that sense. Sleep is important. Here, there are good things here, but you can still perform without it. And then like that part of the message wasn't there because they felt that took away from the force plate. That took away from the nutrition. That takes away from the sleep talk, right? It's like, it's okay. Like they're all just tools. Use the tools. The tool doesn't need to be perfect. We don't have a fucking single tool in the world that is perfect, right? You can't use a hammer for everything. The same is going to apply to the force plate. The same is going to apply to the calorie tracker that we have or the sleep tracker, right? Like there's benefits and negatives of both things and just being more realistic about it. I think that's all you can ask for.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if, someone did a study on the Michael Jordan flu game, and it was like, well, look at how good he was when he had the flu. He had the flu. Like, look at this. And I feel like that's sometimes how they treat things. It's like, and I've fallen victim to that too. Like where I've gotten like, I almost feel like, you like a higher level athlete, it's like when it becomes more and more your personality, more your identity, and more like every aspect of your life, when the smallest thing goes wrong, it's like catastrophic. You're like, oh my God, like the grocery store didn't have the brand of this that I want. And so now I had to have this. That took longer. Now I'm not eating what I want to eat. And like I got woken up like a half an hour earlier. So I only got 8 hours instead of 8.5, like I'm supposed to get. Now my Whoop says I'm 40%. And it's like, you get so wrapped up in the data when you're like, okay, dude, I need to know being a human occurs. Things happen.
The stress for the data does more harm than what the data was actually telling you the harm would have done.
And so I think right now our volleyball team at Pitt is insanely good. I think they're like number one in the country. And one of the cool things that they were doing was, so they do some of that like de-identify, or I don't even know if there's a de-identify, but like they do some of those wellness reports, but they never do them on like as they're traveling to a game and when they're going to a game, because some of the questions are like, hey, like what feels bad today? Like
how
how
you don't want to think about that.
Like how sore are you? Like how much did you sleep last night? Like all of these things. And they're like, yeah, dude, we literally, and that's just being like a good sports scientist, like a good coach.
Yes.
Yeah. You're like, okay, like we don't want them to even be thinking about the things that went wrong, because we don't want them to just catastrophize about like what's happened. We don't need them to focus on that, because they will. And that's like a very cool understanding of like, hey, like sometimes we should focus on like what's going wrong and like how to fix it. But at the end of the day, like when the game time is happening, we can't worry about the 40 minutes less of sleep that, oh, I had to fly across the country. Like I was in a bad hotel. My AC wasn't working. Like, oh, I'm going to perform so bad. Like, you're like, okay, well,
dude,
that's
and that's like the perfect example of a thought like that of what would a questionnaire do to an athlete when you have these questions. Like those thoughts don't pop up if you're not an athlete yourself or haven't been an athlete, right? Because like you don't think about what those thoughts do to you. You just think it's data. You just think it's a question. It's like, why would that matter? Until you like have been an athlete and you freaked out about those exact things they're freaking out. So like I think that's a beautiful example of using real life experience and knowledge to help the sports science part of it. Like use the reality to help the data behind it. And you would, but like even that question that they brought up of, should we ask this on game day? Like that, those questions don't cross some of these coaches' minds or some of these sports scientists' minds because they're so far disconnected. Like that's the perfect wraparound to what you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah. And that's, I think if you can deliver meaningful like actions via and like back them up with data, that's like the important thing. But you shouldn't go into something thinking that like I need to be the savior of whatever's going on. Like I'm going to be the difference maker. Like you should be trying to look at how the athletes are going, what they're doing, and how to make it better for them. And sometimes that's you doing nothing. Like if everything's moving, like if they hired, like the volleyball team hired a new sports scientist, or like the interns right now that we are like working with them, like the coaching staff and like some of the other like salaried people are basically telling us like, do not touch a thing right now. Like, I don't care like what good ideas you have, like what things we could measure or do, like everything is working. We're the number 1 ranked team in the country. We're working. Yeah. Like do not all of a sudden be like, hey, I have this better way we can monitor sleep and like F up how all of like the girls like are doing. Like leave it alone. We can maybe try something in the off season, but like, what do we have to change? Like we are currently doing everything right and it's working. Like, let's let the flow state happen here. And we don't need to interject ourselves because we want to feel important. And I think that's one thing that's hard for a lot of people, is being like, wow, it's working. Like I don't need to, there's not much I need to do here. Like, let me kind of be in the background and keep observing, like keep collecting what I'm collecting. Maybe I'll stumble upon something that we could change later, but right now it's working. So let's leave it work and not make myself the center of attention.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Keep the goal a goal, and the goal's working. You've done your job. Everything there is working.
Yeah.
Dude, this is the sick podcast. I'm excited for the future ones. What do we have to tell the guests anything else? Like, you're just going to be on the podcast, you're going to be reaching out to people, you're going to be editing, stuff like that. I don't know. What else do we have to tell them? That's pretty much it. Anything else you think?
I think that's it. Excited to hop on and help out, and hopefully get some better guests on and just keep it rolling and bring people some good info.
Fuck yeah. All right. Thank you guys for listening. Keep chopping wood.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week as we dive down another rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram at Austin Yoakum to stay updated on future podcast guests. Keep chopping wood.